let's get on to a new conversation. And the new conversation is actually really sparked around, it's actually sparked around Elon Musk and Twitter. Now, it's not got anything to do with Elon Musk and Twitter, but it's got to do with a tweet that he put out this morning, 5 hours ago, New Zealand time. Well, I guess 5 hours ago, everywhere in the world, but whatever 5 hours was in New Zealand. So 6 o'clock this morning, 6:30 this morning. Elon Musk put out this tweet. And I think this tweet is a really interesting conversation because it's not an uncommon thought that Mr. Musk is putting out. He's obviously doing it in a very defensive way to go, look, I haven't changed, but look at these lunatic on the far left where they've gone. But because that's his perspective from where he sits politically, and it relates and demonstrates who is criticizing him right now, which is the people who he is calling the far left. So what this basically says, I mean, I'm not trying to tell you how to suck eggs, but what this basically says is, look, here's me, here's Elon as a center-left person in 2008. In 2012, here's Elon as a centrist, more centrist, but more kind of erring on the side of left, and his fellow liberals starting to run further away from him to the left. And he says in 2021, here he is sitting in the same spot. So that's the thing to look at. He hasn't moved, but the center has now moved further to the left. And so he is considered to be on the right. And everyone who was his fellow liberal in the past is now, yelling at him. And I know it's not necessarily him. Maybe he's not defending himself. He probably is, but maybe he's not defending himself personally, but he's going, people like me, people who were in the center-left position are now considered to be right-wing bigots. That's what he's saying. Now, it's a really interesting conversation, and I think we'll pick up with this with some political commentators and scientists and academics next week. But what I wanted to do was actually have a quick look at it and also point out that even though the tweet that Elon sent out very much talked about, I think, where he is at, this is not uncommon to anyone in that sort of centrist political world. I mean, and to prove that, I wanted to bring up a comment from John Kasich, who, of course, is a Republican. He is someone who ran for a government as under the Republican banner, and he is saying exactly the same thing, but he is saying it from the right. In other words, the Trumpian right has run away from him. The Republican Party has left me, him denying that he's left the Republican Party. And let's just have a listen to what he's got to say about that.
You have a department store that's red and a department store that's blue, and neither of them right now are providing products to the great middle. And you know what happens? Then that's how another store opens up in the neighborhood. In other words,
are you going to open up that store?
I'm still a Republican, and I want to pull my look. I didn't leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party left me. In my state, we have balanced budgets, surplus. We're up 500,000 jobs. And then people say, well, Kasich's not a conservative. What does that mean? Does that mean I have to be anti-immigrant, anti-trade, in favor of debt? I mean, what party? Come on home. Come home to where we basically live. We're pro-immigrant. We're pro-trade. We're pro-growth. We worry about debt. We should care about people from top to bottom, not just those at the top, but everybody. I can bring that party back. That's what I'm going to do in one way or another, Jay.
So the reason I laughed there was not what Kasich was saying. It was based on a couple of tweets by A-hole atheist. The first one talking about Elon saying what he posted there is dumb, and then quite soon after that, listening to Kasich, what he is saying is also dumb. And it may be true, but it's what I'm saying is it's a common refrain. It's a common refrain that we're hearing from people going, my party has left me. This used to be the values and principles of my party. It's no longer. I haven't moved. They have. Now, whether you're Elon saying the left has run away from me, or whether you're Kasich saying the right has run away from me, it's a common thing that's being said out there. It's a little bit like the idea, and I've said this before on this show, that you hear that idiom or that saying, if you're not liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. And if you're not conservative when you're old, you don't have a brain. Now, first of all, before I get another message from A-hole saying what you're saying is dumb, fair, is that I believe that saying to be completely wrong, but I believe there is some truth in the idea that the younger you get, the more liberal you get. So in other words, someone like me who's Gen X, by those who are younger than me, I'm seen as more conservative than them. So if you go 2 generations from me, so you've got millennials and then you've got Gen Z or Gen Z. The Gen Z, the millennials and I can probably align ourselves with some political ideas, although they'll be a bit more progressive. But you get to Gen Z, and their political ideas are far more liberal than mine. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not liberal. It means that as you get younger and as the generations go on, they get more liberal. So think about that. Now think about a boomer and a Gen Z. So those boomers who were, they were the peace, love, and hippie movement and all those kinds of things. And in their day, think about that person, putting the daisy into the rifle and supporting peace and anti-war. They were the most liberal people around. Those people haven't changed their virtues. What's happened is, well, most of them, some of them, what's happened is the Gen Zs have come along, or I'm not picking on the Gen Zs, I'm just saying the next generations, who are far more liberal. So the philosophies and ideas of those boomers are seen as being far more conservative because they are. So it's not necessarily that when you're young, you're liberal, and when you're old, you're conservative. It's as you get the next generation, they become more liberal. So the generation before you seems more conservative. That's what I think is more accurate with that saying. But because Elon talked about what the left was doing, I've been wanting to share this study with you guys for a wee while because I think it's really interesting. It's a study done in America amongst blue collar workers. I struggle with that word because I've written blue collar workers, and that's now in my brain, and my dyslexia keeps things in my brain, but it's blue collar workers. And it was done by a group, and they wanted to have a look at these blue collar workers in purple parts of America. In other words, parts of America that are kind of split right and left, red and blue, Republican and Democrat. So they're not ardently one way or the other. So blue collar workers. Now you think about New Zealand, you think about Michael Joseph Savage, you think about building state houses. Labour was the party of the blue collar worker. And many would say it's not that party today. Not sure if that's true or not, but many would say that. That is, again, a common refrain. So this research was done by a group, and that was done by a group who are actually a union. So they're already on the left, and they wanted to look at messaging and priorities that move working class workers. So what is said by politicians and political groups, done by a left-wing organization, a union, to a purple area focusing on blue-collar workers, how do they vote and what moves them? And it had some fascinating results, and we're going to have a look at some of them right now, because this is a little bit about, I think, the idea of, is the left moving further to the left in this case, because that's what they're talking about primarily. So the first thing they do is they're on Breaking Points here, which is a great show if you haven't seen it. Let's just have a look at the first part of this. And they basically just ask, what is the study all about? And here is the response.
Right. So, we were thinking a lot about this major question. I think it's a huge question in progressive politics, Democratic Party politics, about why it is that Democrats are losing so many working class voters, even though many of the policies that Democrats put forward are actually quite popular with working class voters. So we wanted to figure out what was going on here. And we figured that many of the polling firms that are currently trying to answer this question go about it in a kind of half-hearted way. They present voters with a policy and they tell them, do you like this policy, yes or no? Or they present voters with a soundbite and they say, do you like this soundbite, yes or no? So you get all these mix of political messages, and it's really hard to make sense of. Why is Medicare for All so popular, but Medicare for All candidates can't win in swing states? Why is it that progressive policies are popular across the country, but only progressives can get elected in deep blue areas? So we decided to try to create full candidate profiles to actually test what swing state working class voters like, what kind of candidates they gravitate toward, what kind of messaging they like, and what kind of platforms they like. And that's what we did. We tested about 2,000 swing state voters without college degrees to see what kind of candidates. We put them up against thousands of head-to-head candidates to see what kind of candidates they most prefer.
And so the study goes on, and you'll forgive me while I get this all organized while I'm talking to you live and all by myself. The conversation then went on to talk about there was a part of the survey that talked about the respondents showed clearly that what they liked is for the bread and butter economic issues, the big economic issues, being a forefront of the left's agenda or left's policies, but it was quite important to them that they also used universal terms. And I guess by universal terms, I think of terms that include inclusive terms for everybody rather than exclusive terms. We'll go on to hear what they had to say about that.
So this shouldn't be too surprising. I mean, I think it's something that people have known for quite some time, that economic working class issues appeal to working class voters. What I think is novel here is that we are saying, taking things back to the language of the civil rights movement, the language of the New Deal, framing things in universal terms. That is, these programs are going to help all of us. These programs are going to help the entire working class, and not this or that group of the working class, and not this or that section of the working class, but it's going to lift up everybody, and we're all in this together. That kind of universal messaging polls really well among this group. It polls very strongly among swing state working class voters.
I think it's also really important to point out that what you say here is that doesn't mean you have to abandon social justice. Doesn't mean that you don't talk about civil rights or race at all, but it's important not only how you talk about it, but also which issues you put as the focus and the centerpiece of your campaign. Just talk to us about what you found there.
Yeah, this is something that I think is really an important part of the study and an important part of our findings. A lot of what you'll hear, especially around the Clintonian Democrat world back, 10 years ago, it's different today, is that you can't talk about race or racism, you can't talk about civil rights, you can't talk about sexism, because these things are things that piss off working class white voters, right? We didn't find that to be true. What we found is that if you make that your campaign, if that is the thing that overshadows what you're actually trying to do from a policy perspective and for them and their pocketbooks and their wallets, then you're going to lose.
So what I mean, I'm not trying to tell you how to suck eggs, but what he's saying, to be really clear, and this is, I think, a message for any left-wing party in the world, is that if what is called woke, and I'm going to use the word woke because I actually use woke in the study, I've got the notes here. If you use the woke ideology as your benchmark for what you're trying to do, you are going to lose. But if your benchmark is those quote unquote bread and butter economic issues that working people need and want, then the woke stuff, or whatever is the far left stuff, or whatever is the identity politics stuff, whatever word is the best to use here, can still be achieved and included. But if it's your platform, you're going to lose. And that's what's driving people away from the left at the moment, that many are thinking, this is in America, remember, it may be different here, but many are thinking that those ideologies are the platform policies rather than something else they're working towards, and keeping the platform policies as the bread and butter economic issues.
So you need to be able to frame these things as a way of part of your campaign, part of what you're doing, to offer a holistic program of working class strength rather than make this the entirety of your campaign. And I think that's significant, because I think what it says is that the civil rights victories of the mid-century have been won. We have now moved into an era where we have an electorate that is broadly liberal on these questions, that broadly accepts the want and desire for social justice across a lot of different areas of our lives. But they also recognize the material frustrations of being somebody who doesn't have enough money to pay the mortgage, or is struggling with bills, or is struggling with rent, or these other things. And so you need to be able to center those economic issues if you want to win these voters.
Right. Yeah. So the message here to people who are involved in left-wing politics, I guess, and look, as I said, the reason we're talking about left-wing politics is because that's the example that Elon gave. You probably have exactly the same conversation to be had on the right as well. But the message is your main objective, your benchmark policies, your main objectives for re-election or election are those core economic issues, those core issues that go across everyone, aren't the individual small populists. They can still be achieved if it's important to that party, but if they're the benchmark, if they're the main focus, you're going to lose. And I think that research is really interesting for the left to understand. We're going to finish up with one more clip here. He was asked about, within the survey, right? This is from the survey, that how blue collar workers respond more intensively, or more acutely was the word, to messages between populist and woke language. So populist, I would think inclusive, general, and the reaction that these blue collar workers give between all-inclusive, general, populist language and woke language. Remember, this is talking about being used by political figures looking for election or re-election. This is what he had to say.
Yeah, so if you look at some of our talking points, we took these talking points, these sound bites, from a variety of candidates that we've seen: Ayanna Pressley, Elizabeth Warren, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and we compared them to talking points from what we would consider mainstream or populist Democrats like Biden or Bernie. And when you look at and compare these things, the sort of woke Democrat on the moderate or progressive side are people who are framing things in a way to talk to very particular groups, particular issues, either racial minorities or sexual minorities, or, you know, even folks with disabilities, these sorts of things. But they're framing things in a way that says these are the groups that are the center of politics, right? And then they're using a language on top of that that is basically stuck in the universities. It's very heavy to understand. It's very activist jargony, and it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're not somebody who went to college. So if you compare that with the kind of talking points that you see Bernie and Biden using, those talking points are much more favorable. And then the difference between the Bernie and Biden talking points, or the populist progressive talking point and the moderate mainstream talking point, are that the populist actually names an enemy. Right? The populist says the elites are the problem. We need working people to stand up against them. We believe that there's a real problem in this country between these two groups, and we need to fight together against them. That actually polled better than the moderate message, which was about unity and coming together across the aisle and all that sort of stuff. And among blue-collar manual workers, that was the biggest gap that we saw between the sort of woke candidates and the populist or mainstream candidates.
So there you go. So again, what is very clear in the research, remember, if you're just joining us, or if you're watching on demand, you would have got the thing. They're saying that the far left language, I guess maybe the academic and more college base in America language, is not resonating with the blue collar worker. And it's the reason that in America, at least, and I mean, I've heard many people compare Labour in New Zealand to being that used to be the party of the working class. It no longer is, but it's driving people away. And I guess the problem with that is, where do you go if the thing that's turning off the blue collar worker is things like quote unquote woke ideology? I mean, to be honest, I genuinely despise that term. I don't think it's like people used to say to me, "Oh, these people who are politically correct," and I'd say, "What does that mean? What does that actually mean?" It's a bit of a nebulous statement that means nothing. I think the same about woke, but that's the language that they used in the study that they did. If you use that language as a cornerstone of your election campaign, working class people run from you. And where can they go? In New Zealand, they won't run to the Greens, because whilst the Greens are all about workers' rights, but they are also heavily involved in that same kind of language and that same kind of ideology. Again, not a criticism. I mean, that's all good. But what I'm saying is the data and the research is showing that that kind of language and that kind of pitch at if it's the main pitch you're doing, if it is your benchmark, then actually you're going to lose, and you're going to lose those voters. And that means they're either not going to vote, or to go full circle, unless I've closed down that. I know I haven't. Or to go full circle, and I'm not saying Elon's right here. Let's make that clear. But to go full circle, you might end up being what Elon Musk tweeted out, which is a working class person who ends up being here on the right of center. And maybe you then think, I've only got one party to vote for now. And it's the lesser of two evils, or something like that. Maybe.